All right. So, is it possible to mix charity and business, right? And where we're going with this is basically the 6 different principles to start something that matters. And where this comes from is the book Start Something That Matters by Blake Mycoskie, right? Here's the cover if you need it. So basically, he is an entrepreneur who founded Tom's, the Tom Shoes Company. Basically, it's like a one-for-one type thing. It's like you buy a pair of shoes and then you give a pair of shoes, or well, then they give a pair of shoes to like specifically kids who don't have shoes in South America and Africa. And from my understanding, they also moved to like glasses and eye surgery and that sort of thing in about 2011, I think. So for timing, this was published in 2012. And it's only about 209 pages. It's not all too long, but why you should read this book to begin with, right? And so basically, he came up with, or his idea is maybe the solution for these problems and stuff is entrepreneurship and not charity, right? And that's why it's like it's a for-profit business is what he did, and they also give, right? And so basically in excuse me, in its own words, so this book explains the main principles that made the Tom's business succeed in a new business model that gave back to many people in need, in this case, shoes, right? And so basically, it's like he is giving kind of his formula and what his ideas and such for how to start something that matters, right? The whole giving back, something that matters, right? Um, Anyways, he does this, or he has 6 principles for this, right? The first one is basically find your story. You have to have some form of narrative, right? And this is because people connect with a story, right? Um, stories and narrative are how people, it's kind of their primary way of understanding things, right? We just understand narrative. That's how we speak, right? More or less. Um, Also, by having a story, especially something that someone can relate to and so on, you kind of turn, instead of just having customers, you have more of like a supporter or believer, right? It's kind of like your customers become your own marketing team in a way, and they become very passionate. They can become passionate about them themselves, right? And that's he gives a couple stories in his book about that, right? Another thing is with this story and the giving and everything is can attract larger businesses as partners, ones who don't prioritize that or can't with whatever the case may be. So his second principle is facing your fears. Okay. And so basically it's like you have to live out your story, right? And by doing that, it takes away things like shame and disappointment, which he says kind of underlie our greatest fears. And that's also kind of related to being authentic. So, because basically you're proving to yourself that you're not a fraud by being yourself and being authentic, especially with your business and so on. His third principle is be resourceful without resources. So early and unearned sense of security, right, can be the worst thing that can happen to a business, according to him, right? Not saying anything against that, just saying that's what he says in his book, right? And so basically, too much money can give too much security and basically from the start can be toxic, right? Because you're not frugal in a time where you need to be in the business development and that sort of thing, right? Is the line of reason given, right? So, right, frugality prevents waste, basically, is the idea. And then with this, he also gives 16 different tools, free tools to use that you can use in your business, which can be helpful. Um, so his fourth principle is keeping it simple, right? So basically, many of the most successful designs in the world are also the simplest. And he gives an example of the original iPod, right? Because it didn't have a whole bunch of extra features like a lot of the other its competitors did, but it was simple to use, and that really kind of helped to take over the market. Basically, because it wasn't confusing for the user to try to figure out, especially in a culture that sort of thing wasn't mainstream yet. So, also, it helps the customers focus on the value that you are providing, rather than, other shiny objects that don't really affect them, right? Yeah, they're only getting the core value, and so that's what they have to focus on. It's also easily adaptable because it's not complex. So if things change and you need to adapt either the product, model, whatever, it's easy to do, or at least easier to do, right? Fifth is building trust. And so basically, a brand succeeds or fails based on whether or not the people trust the company, right? Again, taking a quote from his own words. And basically, he segregates this into internal trust, with like within the organization, trust that, your fellow employees will do what you do, what management or your fellow employees will do what they're supposed to do, take initiative and actually, like do their job and that sort of thing and work, as well as management doing their part, right? And everyone kind of trusts each other and that sort of thing. The other form of trust that he has is external trust, which is basically like your customers that are buying your product, or other businesses that are working with you, whether it be vendors or otherwise. Finally, his last principle is giving is good business. So he says your customers become your marketers, attracts large companies as partners, and is more fulfilling for all involved. So that's kind of his whole reason for the whole giving part of the business, right? Obviously, that's not his reason. Those are side effects of doing that with your business. If it's literally like the whole giving and kind of charity aspect is integrated within your business model, is the idea. That's kind of the whole reason for the book, his business, and that sort of thing. And he gives good examples in a lot of stories of other businesses that followed the same thing, more or less, or just very other businesses throughout the world that do something that matters, right? And kind of how he sees that meaning. So to kind of reiterate, he has 6 principles for having this kind of one-for-one model work. Basically, someone buys a pair of shoes in this case, or buys a product, and then you give away another one, or give something back, right? And so his 6 principles are basically finding your story, narrative, however you want to describe it, and then facing your fears and actually doing it. Being resourceful without resources, especially on startup because you don't have anything. Keeping it simple, don't let it get too complex, that sort of thing. Building trust, and then giving is good in business. Or giving is good business, just in general, right? So with that being said, I'm going to leave this one here. Here is the cover of this one in case you want to find it yourself. And as always, I'll put a link in the description to get the book yourself if you wish. So with that being said, I'm going to leave this one here, and I hope to see you guys on one of the other book reviews.